Hello? This thing on? I like Overwatch Season 9.
وريهم قوتك.
Pure skill.
Season 9 was one of the most controversial patches in Overwatch history, but I think it was one of the best things to happen to the game, but not for the reasons Blizzard gave us. For anyone who's not a nowhere, Season 9 had these things. 1. They added a global out-of-combat healing passive, which turned out as a major success. It was a nerfed version of the one for supports. 2. They replaced the old damage roll passive of eliminations, granting a 25% increase of reload speed with a 2-second 20% anti-heal and doing damage to a target. Hog should be receiving 75 per shot, but because of the DPS passive, he only gets 60. 3. The most controversial change, they greatly increased the projectile size of almost all weapons, making shots easier to hit. 4. To keep time to kill the same, they increased the standard health pool from 200 to 250. And 5. The new rank system, which honestly is probably one of the best ones I've seen because there's no hidden MMR. But it's also partially because the old rank system was a train wreck, but that's a different conversation. But it also means it won't be there to protect your feelings like valor. Many argued that it reduced skill requirements and made changes that made zero sense. It was to the point that when the patch notes were leaked, people were debating whether they are real because the changes were so wild. And I'm gonna be honest, I was one of the people telling everyone that these changes were probably fake. Okay, but here's why the devs said they made these changes. They said damage was too bursty and we need more counterplay against it. They wanted to reduce healing for extended team fights and a more consistent field of firing and landing shots. Raising the base health reduced percentage burst impact, which made damage sources feel less lethal. To keep time to kill the same, they also increased projectile sizes, which is okay in theory, but we'll get to that. And to deal with the rampant amount of burst healing at the time, they introduced the DPS passive we talked about earlier. Malga just released in Season 8, which is probably one of the reasons they added this, because if you played in that season, you would know.
What? His health bar's not going down! His health bar's not going down! His health bar's not going down! Dead.
Because of the increased health pools in DPS passive, they added a healing passive that kicks in after not taking damage to take the edge off for support plays. This is the only change that is universally liked unless your name is Get Quaked On. I believe the changes they made were great, but the point of this video is that the reasoning for these changes makes zero sense. One common criticism was, if your goal was to nerf the amount of burst healing and damage in the game, why not just reduce the amount of burst healing and damage in the game? Why not just reduce the healing overall instead of overcomplicating it by creating the DPS anti-heal passive? The changes that they made, such as projectile sizes to keep time to kill consistent, was good in theory, but for characters whose lethality lied in abilities rather than bullets instantly fell off. Heroes like Reinhardt, who didn't even benefit from increased projectile sizes, suddenly lost the ability to two-shot with Fire Strike. You can say that it was a knock against burst damage, but considering the cooldown and the slow projectile speed, it was fair. There's also a bunch of other minor things that got left behind, like Winston Lee, Doomfist Slam, Bar Roll and Mines, Mercy Heal, and a bunch of other things. Most of these got fixed eventually, but it was so late to the party that it left a sour taste in many players' mouth. There's also the argument that increasing projectile sizes was a big crutch, and there were some outliers with the famous clips such as Mercy being able to aim with the ultimate meter. In this case, the projectile sizes were so big that you couldn't headshot while aiming at the head. Before I started being a show for Season 9, I wanted to get a consensus of opinions about the patch itself to see where the community actually lies on this topic, because for all I know, it could just be a vocal minority. I don't know that many people, so it's a small sample size, so take this with many grains of salt. But I asked 22 players of varying ranks and frequency of playing the game whether Season 9 was a good thing for the game. 9 out of the 9 people Diamond or below believe Season 9 was a positive change for the game. The reasoning included things like helping against high skills healing and bursty characters. Another reason was more variety of health pools. It also made the game feel more accessible to people with worse aim, and hitting shots feels nice, especially if you're not able to. A friend of mine, who's Diamond, said this: overall, yeah, I feel like it's something that made Overwatch a touch more accessible with people with worse aim, while not really affecting the higher ranks as much, you know? The DPS passive still needs to be communicated better, but it's not a bad idea at all. Then I said, so it lowered the skill floor and kept the skill ceiling the same? In my opinion, yeah. Another friend who was like Platt said, in my opinion, the only reason we needed the health increase was because of the crazy amount of damage creep we had at the time. So health pools, no, but they needed something I suppose, and heal reduction, good. Interestingly, 4 out of 13 people Masters Plus thought it was a good change. 4 out of 13 people thought it was negative, and the other 5 didn't care or just neutral about it. The opinions about the DPS passive were actually pretty positively received among this group. The health pools meant that you need to hit more shots, which did need more skill, but the one thing they didn't like was the increased projectile sizes because it lowered the skill of the game they put so much time into mastering. One guy, Sifo, who is a champ pro or something, put it really well. Mixed opinions. Because I think for the health of the casual player base, I can see a perspective where it can be beneficial, especially in a player deficit. Improving the individual player experience from a casual perspective has merit. And another point to it being better is that you can focus on mobile aspects. But I think overall, it decreased the skill gap and made the game less enjoyable for your veteran player base. Funnily enough, there is a negative correlation saying that if you like Season 9, you are bad at the game. But we do need to remember that Diamond and below represents 95% of the player base. And remember, this is a really small sample size, so this may not reflect the real population. Okay, that's enough setup. Here's why I think the changes are actually pretty good. Let's start off with the biggest change, health pools. Pre-Season 9, the range of health pools looked like this. Tracer, 150, Lucio, 200, Soldier, 200, Symmetra, 200, Reaper, 250. Post-Season 9, it looks like this. Tracer, 175, Lucio, 250, Soldier, 250, Symmetra, 250, Reaper, 300. Okay, you might be thinking, wait, it looks the same. You just increased the health. Yes, but it gave them a new set of tools to balance with, because now in Season 21, we have this. Tracer, 175, Lucio, 225, Soldier, 250, Symmetra, 275, Reaper, 300. But why is this a good thing? Before they increased health pools, tweaking between these values was not an option. Raising a hero from 200 to 225 would give them a leg up over a large portion of the cast, and knocking them down to 175 would be equivalent to cutting off their legs. The introduction of 250 HP as a standard allowed for flexible balancing to lean into their hero identities. Lucio always wants to speed around the map, but his high mobility, plus sharing the same health pool as slower characters like Zenyatta, meant that they had to take away from his kill potential in order for him to remain balanced. But with the new standard being raised to 250 in Season 9, in Season 12, they could take away 25 health in exchange for a 22% primary fire damage increase. This helped him lead into the high mobility, while also allowing them to have kill potential. And also pre-Season 9, it would have destroyed some breakpoints. Similar changes with mobility and effectiveness were also made for Echo, Sombra, Sojourn, Juno, Kiriko, Mercy, and Moira. It also allowed Symmetra to move in the opposite direction, with her having a higher frontline presence with 275 HP instead of just being a turret bot. The standard of 250 HP allows way more balancing flexibility than before. This is because before, they could only make shifts to damage and cooldowns. It also allows high mobility characters to also have high lethality without breaking the game. The addition of 250 HP and 225 HP grouping has been additionally helpful in breakpoint balancing for hit scans, allowing some heroes to do 75 damage a shot like Ashe, Ana, and Iyari to 3-shot 225 HP targets makes sense for a balancing perspective, considering how mobile these targets are. It also makes them unable to 3-shot the less mobile targets, which feels way better to play against. This one is less important, but in my head, Cass should not be able to 3-shot Juno. But Ashe should. But with the old health pools, they could both 3-shot everything, so the difference was minimal, and their identities were muddied, and it really didn't help Ashe feel more like a punchy long-range character when Cass could do the exact same thing from any range. Even from a hero fantasy standpoint, the Sombra, a high mobility stealth character, deserved to have the same health pool as a character with zero mobility like Ana? No, probably not. Online, I still see many people call for their version of the Season 9 health pools, and their opinion is valid. You are not wrong to prefer 200 HP, but for some, the negative reaction to these changes were due to many players losing their precious breakpoints, but also because it was only framed as burst damage, because while it did succeed in reducing it, players thought it was an unnecessary and convoluted change due to them not fully explaining the benefits of raising the standard pool to 250. I think if they articulated these changes better and included the 225 and 275 gradient on launch, the changes would have been much more positively received. It might have also just been luck, but I think they were just finding their footing with the new shakeup. The DPS passive one is tricky, but that's because it's misunderstood. At first glance, it's unnecessary. If burst healing is the issue, then nerf the healing. But flat nerfs slow the game down, increasing downtime between fights even if they do increase kill potential, especially with the higher health pools. When it's time to unpeak, you end up sitting behind cover for extra long because 1, it takes longer to fill up your health to the new threshold, 2, there's reduced healing, and more downtime is more boring, and 3, I want to re-peak. Sitting behind cover is boring. I'll play Valorant if I went to AFK. Wait, I might just do that. Oh my god. Okay, never mind. The DPS passive with the current amount of healing is a happy middle ground because you end up peaking for the same amount of time with reduced healing and increased health pools. But when you unpeak, the passive wears off, the healing returns, and you can get back into the fight quicker, which does align with the fast-paced gameplay of Overwatch. Think of it like Medic from Team Fortress 2 getting a healing ramp up based off duration out of the fight, but the opposite. But it functions the same way. Of course, this isn't black and white because you should be using this downtime to reposition, but that's like a high elo conversation I'm in Masters, so. But right now you might be thinking, yeah, but this makes it impossible for tanks and supports to make solo plays because they still deal with the rampant healing without DPS. I agree, so make the DPS passive universal just like they did with supports. Okay, I wrote this part before we found out that they would give it to everyone in season 21, and oh my god, I am the smartest person ever. I predicted that they would give it to everyone. Originally, I was going to suggest replacing it and giving all DPS a 10% movement speed increase while giving everyone the DPS passive. But what they ended up doing with the sub-role passives was so much better. I'm glad they went in that direction. So I'm going to skip over all this part that I wrote. I spent all this time writing. And we'll go to the last part. Projectile size increases. And I'm actually mostly neutral on this one. There are arguments for both sides. Returning back to the opinions, my coach Natius, who does like pro stuff, said it was the worst patch of all time. To quote, it lowered the skill of the game. Instead of having to actually be on target, you were given a lot of forgiveness for missing. The passive added a fun layer. And then some other stuff. If they wanted to go in that direction, it would have to be significantly more health to counteract the fact that anyone can hit any shot now. I think it's a bit of an overstatement, but it does stand true. So one side, especially the high elo side, says that lowering the skill requirements from the game is a bad thing. Skill expression is better for long-term enjoyment, and I believe up to a certain point that is true. Once you make the game too easy, it feels unrewarding to dedicate a large portion of your time to it. If someone who put in 100 hours of dedicated practice had the same aim due to large projectiles of a player who put in 10,000 hours, I would feel pretty bummed as well. On the other hand, Overwatch is a 10-year-old game, meaning the bar of entry is already high enough. We're on its 3rd entry, technically. With a game running this long, it has to be feasible for a new player to try the game. You can also say that there is an unreasonably high mechanical requirement to headshot a tracer even at the highest levels, which is how she remained dominant for so long. Is lowering the skill floor at the cost of sacrificing the skill ceiling worth it for the long-term health of the game? That is a trade-off that you gotta make. I personally like these changes, but I do think they should be toned down a bit. Yeah, if you didn't agree with them about aim before, they gotta tone this down. They can also be used like a balancing tool like they've been doing recently. Increasing consistency of these characters like Tracer allows her lethality to be reduced while maintaining her high kill potential. Okay, that's mostly it, but my point is, without a solid reason behind your decisions and full confidence to follow through on all of them, you can end up with wishy-washy balancing that does not lead to the game having a solid identity. I'm sure they have their reasons for everything, and Season 9 worked. What's important is that we know why. These were good changes that, if were properly articulated, would likely be perceived as much better changes. But it was presented to us as a band-aid fix when in reality, it was complete philosophical shifts. Do we want to lean into the MOBA aspects by having large health pools or cutthroat mechanical FPS? And day by day, I think we're just moving closer to the MOBA. And that's fine, I just want them to say it outright. I know the balancing team is smarter than most of us, and they've proven themselves recently. So come on, why does Seismic Slam still do 50 damage in 2026?